This is Gary, the Carnivorator. Someone recommended that I see this part of a debate in the early days of my carnivore experiment, where Carnivore MD Paul Saladino explains what actually inhibits, blocks insulin, and saying that it's not saturated fat. And here's the comment I got. Vegan Carburetor. There's a video of an MD carnivore guy, Paul Saladino, debating with two PhD educated vegan doctors, Cyrus and Robbie, who run a diabetes program. By the way, they both have type 1 diabetes. And it's about how saturated fat in your diet isn't what is causing the insulin receptor to be blocked. While there can be a lack of communication from insulin, blockage, due to fat blockage, yes. Sounds like he's contradicting himself. It's not the dietary saturated fat that is directly the culprit of that. Paul Saladino tells them how it works and how misinformed they are. Then he claims that Cyrus and Robbie were sorta speechless when they heard that and kinda admitted, okay, maybe we don't have the science too well, it's just what we've learned. Well, the stuff that Saladino's going to say here, isn't that what he's learned? And is he out in the field running a diabetes program? Let's find out the answer to all of these questions. Let's get to the video and see. This discussion is 2 hours long, but fortunately Paul Saladino put in timestamps. The part we want is right here, and it's 9 minutes long. And I don't even want to put all that in the video. I want to keep it short. Now here's the spot right here that I want to show you. It just hits close to home. As Cyrus is talking here, watch Paul's face and his reaction.
A lot of the research points in the fact that when you consume lower carbohydrate diets and diets that tend to be higher in total fat and higher in protein, that's associated with increased cardiovascular mortality and increased diabetes mortality. And I understand that these are epidemiological studies.
But on top of that, he says associated with, and that part, that's the kind of thing that I've always taught you guys is a red flag, or at least keywords to watch for. When something's associated, doesn't mean it's causative. This kind of crap is always pulled on healthy diets. I'm trying to malign things that are not bad.
And that they're not 100% controlled, and there's no way to do a controlled epidemiological study.
And those were not even ketogenic diets. Those were people in
and I'm not arguing that.
Those were people in no man's land. If you actually look, what's so confusing for people is in the research, these low carbohydrate diets are often defined as diets with less than 200 grams of carbohydrates.
Right.
So,
yeah, I'd put it at about 140 grams for it to be low carb. Oh, and I just realized, is he about to use the argument that us low-fat promoters have been using for like 10 years or more? I have always said these so-called low-fat diets used in studies were not low-fat. They were like 30% fat.
These low carbohydrate diets were not the same as what we're talking about here. So they could have put people into physiologic no man's land. The other confusing thing about epidemiology is that there are good studies which show that when people eat more meat, they also eat more processed carbs and refined vegetable oils and processed sugars. And this is probably the problem with most epidemiology today.
Pause. Notice there he said, probably the problem. As for those studies, I would think that the scientists would account for the refined sugar in somebody's diet, especially if these are diabetes studies and the people shouldn't even be eating refined sugar. Or is this one of those studies where they rely on surveying people? In which case, I say, there you go, with all the crappy studies that are out there.
And refined vegetable oils and processed sugars. And this is probably the problem with most epidemiology today, which makes meat look bad, is that people are also eating things that are bad for us with meat at the same time. So
what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I've also made a point that those people who are eating a lot of meat there and a lot of unhealthy foods, these people don't care about their health. And when they eat meat, they are not eating it because they think it's healthy.
Those studies with low carbohydrate diets are misleading because they were not actually the same metabolic physiology that we're describing here.
So I would agree with you.
People
actually.
Were not even ketogenic.
And we see that actually in the research, because there's a lot of research that shows, it says like, let's do a comparison between low fat and low carbohydrate diets. And what they refer to as a low fat diet is actually not even remotely close to low fat in the way that we describe it. Right?
Exactly.
So it's the same thing where it's like you're studying people that are in no man's land. You're trying to make conclusions based off of that, and then you're saying, oh look, by the way, being in no man's land, whatever you want to call it, is actually detrimental for long-term health. I agree with you.
And a lot of vegans make that mistake. Vegan no man's land. They just think they can just eat anything they want if it's vegan. I've seen the whole 9 minutes, and I just don't know about all this. These people tend to lie or read into what they're seeing because of their bias. And there was a part where Cyrus, you could interpret it as speechless. Oh, and I want to say, Robbie over there, he's hardly said anything in the parts that I've seen. So you really can't count him. Here's that part.
That glucose sparing is not the same physiology as pathological insulin resistance and has not been associated with the same lipid or other cardiovascular outcomes or glucose control outcomes or weight loss outcomes. These are completely different physiologies, and to conflate those two is misleading.
Now, maybe he interpreted that as being speechless, but there was no speechlessness.
I don't necessarily fully agree. I think the two of those are different physiological states. The long-term consequences of physiological glucose sparing is something that I don't know that much about. I have to read more about it, and I'm not going to sit here and claim that you don't know what you're talking about, because that's certainly not a true statement. But until I am assaulted with a mountain of evidence that shows that people who are in this physiological glucose sparing state actually end up with improved long-term health outcomes, I can't come to a conclusion and say, oh, okay, the two of them are totally different states, and one leads to improved health and one leads to decreased health. I'm not in that position.
What about the glucose sparing?
What about?
So that was probably the part this person interpreted as they kind of admitted that maybe we don't have the science too well. Well, this is just a case of not everybody knows everything. And just because Cyrus wasn't too familiar doesn't mean that it's true. And I'm pretty lost as to why all this matters. Oh, well, I guess it's just the old desire for meat eaters to feel okay about eating meat. You could see Paul's desperation for wanting to get meat out of the position of blame. Now, as for fat not being the direct culprit, saturated, now I've never made a distinction between types of fat, but if I were to, I'd say saturated fat would be worse for plugging up the receptor cells. So to find Saladino's argument where he schools them, that would probably be right at the beginning. I'll find that. Here we go.
Because when I've looked at your stuff, you guys are claiming that saturated fat causes insulin resistance, and I think that that's wrong.
Okay,
and we can talk about that. I would love to talk about that. But
there's plenty of research to back this up. I mean, this is unbelievable amount of research to back this up.
Do you understand why that happens?
See, right here, I'd like to point out that even when there's plenty of research to back something up, people end up arguing on YouTube for hours. Don't bother with all this stuff. Follow a guy who's in his 50s and doesn't have diabetes.
Dietary saturated fats do not increase blood levels of saturated fat. So the main saturated fat in our blood is palmitate. And palmitoleic acid and palmitate are the two signaling molecules that are released by the adipocytes. And so there's a study by Volek and Finney, effects of stepwise increases in dietary carbohydrate on circulating saturated fatty acids. When they increased saturated fat in the diet, there were no changes in the dietary levels of palmitate in the blood. And so to suggest that saturated fat in our diet increases palmitate is incorrect.
I didn't say that.
Well, you said when you eat saturated fat and your muscle cells uptake saturated fat, you made the inference that saturated fat in your diet increased saturated fat in your blood. And that is
so
not
what you're
true.
Suggesting is that when you consume saturated fat in your diet, that it magically escapes your blood, doesn't go into your blood at all, and therefore doesn't affect your muscle, your liver, or your adipose tissue?
It's different. So it moves through the blood in chylomicrons. It can move from the intestines to the liver in chylomicrons where it's processed. I think the mistake you are making, and this is dangerous for people, is that increased consumption of saturated fat does not increase blood levels of palmitate. And that is where I think things are going off the rails here. And people need to know that. And it's dangerous and unfair to tell people that saturated fat in your diet causes insulin resistance, because that is not true.
So unfair. You want to talk about what's unfair?
I don't necessarily fully agree. I think the two of those are different physiological states. The long-term consequences of physiological glucose sparing is something that I don't know that much about.
All right. By now you should be thoroughly confused. And what about that study that shows that beef causes a glycemic spike? These keto carny crazies are suggesting you avoid that problem by not eating any carbohydrates, which is unnatural and crazy. And this goes to show why you should not put your life in the hands of these studies and any of this information. You need to be looking at nature, and you need to be looking at it properly, which Saladino is not. But I don't have time to show you that clip today. And the two of those guys both suffered from what I'm now going to be calling Techno-Speak-itis. I now have a few short clips for you that have come out in just the last couple of days that perfectly sum up what I have been saying for months. And with this, I retire from politics with the successful run of being right more than anyone else. These 20 news clips sum up my message and how I feel.
Extremists.
The behavior of Donald Trump Jr. was treasonous.
Anti-Americans.
I talked about the former president day in and day out for years, and I know a lot of you would rather never think about him again and just move on. And trust me, I get it. I get it.
For weeks leading up to the insurrectionist riots in the Capitol, they're lying to you. They're intentionally deceiving you.
Leaked audio of the U.S. Capitol rioters.
Keep going.
Get it, Jess. Do your. This is what we lived up for. Everything we trained for.
God. These idiots. But go on, sorry.
Ivanka Trump was dumb as a brick.
This new version of Canada's food guide is a new, simplified approach that encourages plant-based eating. They're not even trying to hide it, you guys. If I was in Canada today, I would be in an uproar. I would be marching to your capital.
Just in the last hour or so, more individuals have started to show up, more armed individuals. I'm just going to show you here. Our great photog, Mark Ringo, is going to show you the crowd. You've got individuals with long guns, and you have some others who are much more heavily armed.
I actually do have some degree of sympathy for some of them who probably went through some trauma in their lives, and that's what set them off emotionally, psychologically.
I've counted at least a dozen or so of these more heavily armed individuals. He was getting intel from some of his sources that the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys would be here, and we are seeing some of those members, the Hawaiian shirts indicating potential Boogaloo Boy members. He was concerned about what they might do. Mayor, the governor, law enforcement, and militias are all oddly in agreement about staying away from the Capitol. He said,
"Thank you for braving it for us. We appreciate that." Let's go from Dasha now to NBC's Morgan Chesky, who's at Wisconsin's Capitol in Madison for us. A little bit better weather there. Not much, though. I see some snowflakes. Other than the weather, what's the situation like?
The footprint here swells.
At least 19 states are deploying the National Guard. Some are even closing their Capitol buildings in preparation for armed protests planned for today. Many of these videos, you can see plywood being chopped up and put in windows. It's all in the run-up to the transfer of power.
Thanks a lot, Trump supporters, for costing taxpayers millions of dollars.
Donald Trump should pay for every state's expense for the extra security. He should pay the United States government for all the security for Biden. He ought to pay for the riot. He's got 77 hours left. He'll do more bad things, but he's a crook. And some people will say, when they hear me say that and see me on television, they say, "You hate Donald Trump." Yes, I hate Donald Trump. He's caused nearly 400,000 people to die of coronavirus. He's ruined my last 10 months.
That right there, I relate to that, because Trump has messed up my last 10 months, given me a stress disorder. Trump has ruined the last 10 months of my YouTube channel. I had plans. It was not supposed to go like this. Not only was I distracted and felt compelled to make these political videos, but also having to adjust my life, protect from the virus, learn about it, start stockpiling food, taking more time away from making the videos I really want to make.
He has threatened my life in the Capitol. He's been a crook for 4 years, and I hate him. Sayonara, crook.
Congressman Steve Cohen.
Just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever.
And I was especially moved by this moment. And surprise, the flag was still there. Rarely is that song a cliffhanger. But just 2 weeks ago, in that spot, it was in danger of being replaced by a Rambo Photoshop.
He makes it sound funny there, and that is half true. Remember the people on that scaffolding? Well, it turns out what they were trying to do was get to the top of the building and take down the United States flag. And worse than that, they wanted to replace it with a Trump flag. That would have been the most anti-American, disgraceful image that would forever tarnish my country, that these deplorable Republicans are trying to take away.
You've had Republicans bragging about bringing loaded guns on the House floor. You've had other members of the Republican caucus believing in conspiracy theories and spreading conspiracy theories that Democratic leaders are cannibals and that there is a global conspiracy to kidnap children and have a pedophile ring. And these are the people who are screaming and yelling that they shouldn't be scanned for having guns. There's actually a House member who was screaming about the real atrocity. Yeah. It wasn't the mob, wasn't the overthrowing, the attempt to overthrow the federal government. The real atrocity was that they couldn't bring loaded guns onto the House floor. These people are crazy. These people are out of their mind. These people are actually the very reason why they're having to put those metal detectors up going into the House, Jim, because you have unhinged people who want to overturn the election results and who wanted to storm the Capitol and who committed sedition.
Yeah, and there's a rule, as you know, Joe, you cannot have a gun on the floor of the House. That's it. You can have your handgun on the Capitol complex. Republican Congressman Rodney Davis of Illinois reportedly told Capitol Hill officers, quote, "This is BS." Arizona Congresswoman Debbie Lesko went further in her criticism, tweeting, "These new provisions include searches and being wanted like criminals."
Like kids are in school, because these evil fucking Republicans will not pass gun reform, because those shooters are the people who vote for those Republicans. And that bitch is projecting. If she thinks it means she's being treated like a criminal, maybe she's projecting that she is a criminal. Because when you go to the airport and get scanned, you don't feel like a criminal, do you?
Wanted like criminals. We now live in Pelosi's communist America. Again, this is because Greg Steube, a Republican congressman from Florida, called the metal detectors an atrocity, saying, quote, "Take note, America. This is what you have to look forward to in the Joe Biden administration."
But Trump is your president right now. This is the result of 4 years of Trump. Biden is not in power. He has no power. This is happening under Trump.
Just had to go through a metal detector before entering the House floor. Some colleagues are frustrated, guess which ones, by this requirement. Now they know how high school students in my district feel. Suck it up, Buttercup, she wrote. Y'all brought this on yourselves.
And if these Republicans who are talking about how they want to carry guns onto the House floor want to understand why that scares people, I read from a September 4th, 2020 article. GOP candidate poses with rifle, says she's targeting socialist congresswomen of holding a rifle with photos of 3 liberal congresswomen of color and vowed to, quote, go on the offense. That was Marjorie Taylor Greene, now a member of Congress. And anybody wonders, Mika, why they've got to put up security outside?
And it blows my mind. Like, they think that the insurrectionists weren't actually insurrectionists. It was BLM. It was Black Lives Matter. You know, because Black Lives Matter consists of a bunch of young white guys who riot while wearing hoodies celebrating Auschwitz.
You're going to be raising inflammation levels in the body. This is a disgrace.
portrait of a radicalized conservative, ripe for the brainwashing, already born with a genetic disposition towards violence.
Just look at the crowd. Look at the, really?
Can anyone explain how QAnon is not over when they said for sure, 100%, before Trump leaves office, he is part of this plan and they're going to mass arrests of all the people who are part of it. And now they're crestfallen to find out that Trump is not a genius, there is no plan, there was no ring, and that they're all morons. And look, I don't know if it's mental illness. There's some, and some of those folks were probably traumatized when they were younger, and that's why they're more likely to believe this.
Supporters of the QAnon conspiracy theory that are now facing a cold, hard truth that President Trump will not be serving for another 4 years. The moment that Joe Biden took the oath of office, QAnon followers exploded on message boards. They had a lot of confusion. They had a lot of questions. And John Avlon has a reality check.
We do have a problem with extremist propaganda really resonating with Trump's base. We also have a problem with mental health, issues that go untreated because of how broken our healthcare system is. Like, there are a lot of people out there who have untreated mental health issues.
For your own sake, get help. And it's not like, haha, get help. No, literally, you have to get help because you can't tell that 2 + 2 = 4. I don't know how you exist in the world. Are those trees? Is the grass is green? Is the sky blue? You can't tell anything because you've detached from reality. You're part of a cult.